Welcome to HOA anger. She tried to ban me, so I documented everything. I hope you are settled in, because this one gets wild fast. Krista Harlow shoved a grainy hallway still frame at me and yelled that shadows counted as identification. I will make sure the neighbors see this. Her voice was so loud that two people on the sidewalk stopped and turned. The photo showed a package locker door hanging open at the Pine Hollow mailbox cluster, and she claimed I had forced it. I had not touched it. I had not even been near the mailbox cluster that morning. But Krista did not care about facts. She cared about performance, and right now she was performing authority for an audience of confused neighbors who had no idea what they were walking into. This is Tampa, Florida, where the heat makes everyone irritable, and the Pine Hollow Property Owners Association makes everyone miserable. I am a paramedic, which means I work 12-hour shifts, and I do not have time for HOA theatrics. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was reasonable, and the place looked quiet. That was a mistake. Krista Harlow is the pool committee chair, and she has decided that enforcing mailbox rules is her personal stage. She wears a cheap laminated badge on a lanyard, carries a ring of keys that jingles like a jailer's, and slams a red stamp on complaint forms like it is a verdict. This community has standards. That is her catchphrase, and she says it every time she wants to shut someone down. Right now she was saying it again, louder, because I was not backing down. This community has standards, and you violated them. The locker door was forced. You were seen near the mailbox cluster yesterday. I need you to admit what you did so we can move forward. Her tone was fake calm, the kind of calm that is really a threat. I told her I had not forced anything, I had not stolen anything, and I wanted to see the actual evidence. She smiled, and that smile was worse than the yelling. She told me the evidence was obvious. The shadows in the photo matched my build, and daily fines would start tomorrow unless I admitted it. I can fine you daily until you give up. That was the line that made my stomach drop, because I knew she meant it. The HOA had threatened to suspend my gate access at midnight if I did not resolve this, and I could not afford to miss work for hearings and disruptions. I was still on probation at my new job, and my supervisor had already warned me about attendance. Krista blew her whistle, and the neighbors who had stopped to watch jumped. She told them I was under investigation for theft, and they should keep their distance. That was the first public shaming, and it worked. People backed away. One woman pulled her kid closer and hurried toward the clubhouse. Another guy just shook his head and walked off. I felt my face burn, but I stayed calm. I asked Krista what exactly I was supposed to have stolen. She paused, then said a toolkit case had gone missing from the mailbox cluster area, and since I was the last person seen near the lockers, I was the obvious suspect. I pointed out that the mailbox cluster was a public area, and dozens of people used it every day. She ignored that and said she had already filed a complaint with the HOA and the management office, and if I did not cooperate, she would escalate to the police. I told her I wanted to file a counter-complaint, and she laughed. She said the HOA did not accept counter-complaints from people under investigation. That was a lie, but she said it with so much confidence that I wondered if she believed it herself. Then she added that she was neutral in this process. She was just following protocol, and if I had nothing to hide, I should be happy to clear my name. That was the second lie. She was not neutral. She had already decided I was guilty, and she was recruiting people against me. I saw her whisper to another board member earlier that week, and now that guy would not make eye contact with me. Krista jingled her huge key ring like it was authority. She told me she had access to all the common areas, all the storage closets, and all the restricted zones, and if I wanted to prove my innocence, I should consent to a search of my unit. I said no. She smiled again and said that refusal would be noted in the complaint. Then she walked away, and I stood there with a pen gripped too tightly in my hand and a growing sense that this was about to get much worse. That night, I checked my doorbell camera footage. I had installed it 2 months ago because Krista had already accused me once of leaving trash in the common area. The footage showed I had not been near the mailbox cluster the morning the locker door was left open. I had left for work at 6:30 and gone straight to my car. The timestamp was clear. I saved the clip and started putting together a timeline. If Krista wanted a paper trail, I would give her one. The next morning I got a notice taped to my door. It was printed on Pine Hollow letterhead, and it said I was being fined $50 per day, starting immediately for violation of mailbox locker security protocols. The notice was signed by Krista and stamped with her red stamp. I pulled it off the door and read it twice, looking for any hint of process or appeal rights. There was none. Just the fine amount, a vague reference to community standards, and a line that said continued violations would result in suspension of access privileges. I took a photo of the notice and sent it to the management office with a request for clarification. Then I went to work, because I could not afford to call in. When I got home that evening, there was another notice. This one said the HOA had received reports that I was running a side business from my home, which violated zoning and use restrictions. That was Krista's frame-up method. She was trying to make the theft narrative stick by adding a motive. The notice said an inspection would be scheduled, and failure to comply would result in legal action. I read it standing in my doorway, and I felt the walls closing in. I had no side business. I had a paramedic job, a lease, and a growing stack of bogus complaints. I called the management office, and the receptionist told me she could not discuss open complaints and I should direct all questions to the board. I asked who was on the board. She said Krista Harlow, among others. I hung up and started making a list of every interaction I had had with Krista, every notice, every threat, every witness. The twist came 3 days later. I was at the tow yard picking up paperwork for a neighbor whose car had been towed from the guest lot. The clerk, a guy named Ray who had worked there for years, recognized the Pine Hollow name on the paperwork and groaned. He said Krista had been calling the tow company constantly, demanding cars be towed for expired tags, unauthorized parking, and overnight guests. Ray said she had tried to get him to tow my car twice, but he had refused because my parking was valid and my tags were current. He showed me the call log, and there were 6 calls from Krista in 2 weeks, all targeting specific units. Ray said he had started telling her no, and she had threatened to switch tow companies. That was when I realized this was not just about me. Krista was running a campaign, and I was the latest target. Ray also mentioned something else. He said Krista had asked him to hold a toolkit case that had been left in a towed car, and she had picked it up herself a week ago. He had the authorization slip. It was signed by Krista and dated the same day the locker door had been left open. I asked Ray if I could get a copy of that slip. He hesitated, then printed it and handed it over. He said he did not want trouble, but he also did not like people who lied. I thanked him and left with the slip in my jacket pocket and a new plan forming. That evening I went to the clubhouse to request copies of all HOA correspondence related to my unit. The receptionist at the desk told me I could not request records while under investigation. I asked who made that rule. She said Krista had instructed her to refuse my packet and to send me away. That was Krista's vendor pressure move, and it was illegal. Florida public records law requires HOAs to provide records to members, and I was a member in good standing. I told the receptionist that, and she looked uncomfortable. She said she was just following instructions. I asked her to write down that she had refused my request and to include Krista's name. She did not write anything, but she also did not send me away. Instead, she excused herself and made a phone call. 2 minutes later, Krista walked into the lobby. Krista was holding her key ring and her whistle. This community has standards, and you are disrupting office operations. I told her I was requesting public records, which was my legal right. She said I had forfeited my rights by stealing and lying. I said I had not stolen anything, I had proof, and I wanted the records so I could file a formal complaint against her. She laughed and said complaints against board members required a 2/3 vote to be heard, and she controlled the votes. That was the moment I realized she was not just abusing the system. She was the system. Krista tried to bait me into yelling. She raised her voice and accused me of threatening the receptionist. I stayed calm and asked her to repeat that claim on the record. She stopped and stared at me. Then she said she did not have time for games and walked out. The receptionist exhaled and handed me a form. She said I could submit a written request and it would be processed within 7 business days. I filled out the form and left, but I also recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Krista did not know that, and it would matter later. The escalation hit the next day. I was walking to my car when Krista intercepted me in the parking lot. She had 2 neighbors with her, both older women who looked nervous. Krista pointed at me and said loudly that I was stealing from cars and someone had seen me near the guest lot the night before. That was escalation step 1, and it was a complete fabrication. I had not been near the guest lot. I told her that, and she turned to one of the neighbors and asked if she was sure it was me. The neighbor hesitated, then nodded. Krista smiled and said the HOA would be filing a police report. I asked the neighbor to describe what she had seen. She said she had seen someone near the cars, but she had not seen a face. Krista cut her off and said the description matched me. I pulled out my phone and showed them my doorbell camera footage from the night before. I had been home the entire evening. The neighbor looked confused. Krista looked furious. She told me doorbell footage could be edited and walked away with the neighbors following her. That afternoon, I got a call from my ally, the extra witness I had not expected. Her name was Linda, and she lived 3 units down. She said Krista had targeted her last year with bogus pet violation complaints, and she had only gotten clear after filing a formal complaint with the state. Linda said she recognized the pattern, and she wanted to help. She told me Krista had a storage closet near the pool that only she had keys to, and she had seen Krista carrying packages and boxes into it multiple times. Linda said she had assumed Krista was just organizing HOA supplies, but now she was not so sure. I asked Linda if she would be willing to speak up if it came to a public confrontation. She said yes, but only if I had solid proof. I told her I was working on it. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more neighborhood drama, where the good guys win. The second escalation step came 2 days later. I was heading to the clubhouse gym when Krista stepped in front of the entrance and told me I was banned. That was escalation step 2, and it was completely illegal. She said the HOA had decided I was a security risk, and my access was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. I told her she could not do that without a hearing. She said the bylaws allowed emergency suspensions for safety reasons, and my refusal to cooperate constituted a safety issue. I asked to see the bylaw. She pulled out a laminated sheet and pointed to a paragraph. I read it. The paragraph was about emergency evacuations, not access suspensions. I told her that. She said I was misreading it, and she had consulted with the HOA attorney. I asked for the attorney's name. She refused and told me to leave, or she would call the police for trespassing. Krista pulled out a cheap handheld radio and keyed it like she was calling security. There was no security. Pine Hollow did not have security. She was performing again, and this time she had an audience. A small group of residents had gathered near the pool gate to watch. Krista turned to them and said I was refusing to comply with HOA directives and I was creating a hostile environment. That was her public shame method. She was trying to force my ally to contradict me in public. Linda was in that group, and Krista pointed at her and asked if she agreed that I was being disruptive. Linda looked at me, then at Krista, then said she did not think I was being disruptive at all. She said I was just asking questions, and that seemed reasonable. Krista's face went red. She told Linda she was out of line, and Linda said she was just being honest. The other residents looked uncomfortable, and one of them muttered something about needing to get back inside. The group started to break up. Krista was losing the room, and she knew it. She called someone on her phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. She told the person on the line that she needed backup. There was a trespasser at the clubhouse, and she wanted the gate access code changed immediately. Then she hung up and told me I had until midnight to vacate all common areas or my access would be suspended permanently. That was the time pressure, and it was real. I had 8 hours to prove I was innocent, or I would lose access to the mailbox, the gym, the pool, the clubhouse, and possibly the front gate. I could not afford that. I left and went straight to my car. I spent the next 6 hours pulling together everything I had. The doorbell camera footage, the tow yard authorization slip, the timeline showing Krista's calls to the tow company, the recording of Krista refusing my records request, the notice with the fake side business accusation, and one more thing, a records request I had filed with the county property appraiser showing that Krista had changed her mailing address 3 times in 2 years, each time after a complaint was filed against her at a previous address. That was not proof of theft, but it was proof of a pattern. I printed everything, put it in a binder, and labeled it with sticky tabs. Then I called Linda and asked her to meet me at the pool gate at 11 that night. She said she would. At 10:45 I walked to the pool gate. Krista was already there, standing under the light with her arms crossed and her red stamp in one hand. She saw me and smiled. This community has standards, and you are about to learn what happens when you break them. I did not respond. I just stood there with my binder and waited. Linda showed up 2 minutes later, along with 3 other residents who had heard what was happening and wanted to see how it played out. Krista looked annoyed but did not send them away. She told me I had until midnight to admit what I had done and agree to pay restitution, or my access would be revoked. I told her I had not done anything, and I had proof. She laughed and said my so-called proof was fabricated. I opened the binder and pulled out the tow yard authorization slip. I held it up so everyone could see. I said this was Krista's signature. This was the date the locker door was left open, and this was the toolkit case she claimed I stole. Krista's face went pale. She said the slip was fake. I turned to Linda and asked if she recognized Krista's signature. Linda looked at the slip and nodded. She said she had seen Krista sign dozens of forms, and that was definitely her signature. The other residents started murmuring. Krista raised her voice and said the slip proved nothing. The toolkit had been in a towed car, and she had retrieved it for the owner. I asked her who the owner was. She said she did not remember. I asked her why she had not logged it as found property. She said she had. I pulled out a copy of the HOA found property log I had gotten from the management office that afternoon. The log did not include the toolkit. Krista said the log was incomplete. I asked her who was responsible for maintaining the log. She did not answer. I said her name was on the log as the coordinator. The murmuring got louder. Krista tried to pivot. She said the real issue was my refusal to cooperate, my hostile behavior, and my attempts to intimidate board members. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of our conversation in the clubhouse lobby. Her voice came through clearly, accusing me of threatening the receptionist and claiming I had forfeited my rights. The receptionist's uncomfortable silence was audible. When the recording ended, one of the residents said that did not sound neutral. Another said it sounded like harassment. Krista told them they were out of order and they needed to leave. Nobody moved. Then I pulled out the clue props. The first was a photo Linda had taken 3 weeks ago showing a stash bin in a restricted area behind the pool equipment room. The bin was labeled with Krista's initials. Linda said she had taken the photo because she thought it was odd that Krista had personal storage in a restricted area. The second clue prop was another photo, this one from a different angle, showing the same bin with the lid open. Inside were packages, a toolkit case, and what looked like petty cash envelopes. Linda said she had taken that photo 2 days ago after Krista had accused me, because she wanted to document what was in the bin before Krista moved it. I held up both photos and asked Krista to explain why she had a stash bin full of items that matched stolen property reports. Krista said the bin was for HOA supplies. I asked why HOA supplies included packages with resident names on them. She did not answer. I asked Linda if she recognized any of the packages. Linda said she recognized one. It was hers. She had reported it missing 6 months ago. The crowd was not murmuring anymore. They were staring at Krista. One of the residents asked if she had been stealing packages. Krista said no, she had been collecting lost items, and she had planned to return them but had been too busy. I asked why she had not logged them. She said she had intended to. I asked why she had accused me of theft when she had the missing toolkit in her own storage bin. She said I was twisting the facts. I asked her to explain the facts. She said she did not owe me an explanation and she was done with this conversation. She turned to leave, and Linda stepped in front of her. Linda said she wanted her package back. Krista said she did not have it anymore. Linda asked where it went. Krista said she did not remember. Linda said that sounded like theft. The twist landed hard. One of the residents pulled out his phone and said he had been recording the entire conversation. He said he was going to send it to the management office and the HOA attorney. Krista tried to grab his phone, and he pulled it away. She yelled at him, and he told her to back off. Another resident said she was calling the police. Krista said there was no need for police. Everything could be resolved internally. The resident said it was too late for that, and she dialed. Krista looked around at the crowd, realized she had lost, and walked away without another word. She did not slam her stamp. She did not blow her whistle. She just left. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I gave them copies of everything in my binder, plus the photos Linda had taken. The officer took statements from Linda, from me, and from the resident who had recorded the conversation. He asked where the storage bin was, and Linda offered to show him. They walked to the restricted area, and 10 minutes later the officer came back with the bin. It was full. Packages, cash envelopes, a toolkit case, a clipboard, and a stack of complaint forms. The officer said it looked like evidence of theft, and he was going to open an investigation. He gave me an incident number and told me to follow up with a formal statement. I thanked him, and he left with the bin in his trunk. The final humiliation moment came 3 days later. I was at the management office following up on my records request when the receptionist called Krista on speaker. She did not realize I was standing right there. The receptionist asked Krista about the storage bin and the police report. Krista said it was all a misunderstanding. She had been holding items for safekeeping, and the HOA attorney would clear it up. Then the receptionist said the attorney had already called, and he had advised the HOA to distance itself from Krista immediately. Krista went silent. The receptionist said the board had voted to remove Krista from the pool committee and suspend her access to all restricted areas. Krista said that was illegal. The receptionist said the vote was unanimous and the decision was final. Then she said Krista needed to return all HOA property, including keys, the stamp, and the laminated badge. Krista hung up. The receptionist looked at me and said she was sorry for refusing my records request. She said Krista had threatened to get her fired if she helped me. I told her it was fine, and I appreciated her honesty now. The payback vector was a records request that exposed contradictions and edits. I had filed a formal request for all HOA correspondence related to my unit, Linda's unit, and the 6 other units Krista had targeted. The management office provided everything, and it was damning. complaint forms with identical wording, fines issued without hearings, threat letters signed only by Krista, and multiple edits to the found property log, all made by Krista, all on dates that matched reported thefts. I compiled it into a single document and sent it to the board, the management office, and the HOA attorney. The attorney responded within 2 hours. He said the HOA would be conducting an internal audit, Krista would not be involved, and all fines issued by Krista in the past year would be reviewed for validity. He also said the HOA was retracting the accusation against me in writing and clearing the ledger. I got the retraction letter the next day. It was short, formal, and signed by the board president. It said the complaint against me had been investigated and found to be without merit, all fines were rescinded, and my access privileges were fully restored. It did not mention Krista by name, but it did not need to. Everyone knew. The funny karma beat came a week later. Krista had claimed during the Poolgate confrontation that she had never touched the missing toolkit case. But the resident who had recorded the conversation also had a dash cam, and his clip showed Krista carrying the toolkit case from the mailbox cluster to her car 2 days before she accused me. The timestamp matched the date the locker door was left open. The resident posted the clip in the neighborhood group chat, and within an hour everyone had seen it. Krista deleted her account and stopped attending HOA meetings. The board replaced her with someone who actually followed the rules. The HOA consequence was clear. The HOA retracted the accusation in writing and cleared the ledger. They also implemented new policies requiring 2-signature authorization for fines, mandatory logging of all found property within 24 hours, and quarterly audits of restricted area storage. The board president apologized to me personally and said the HOA would be more careful about vetting committee chairs in the future. Karen's consequence was just as satisfying. Karen stormed out when the room turned against her. She tried to show up at the next board meeting to defend herself, but the board refused to let her speak. She yelled that she had rights, and the board president said her term had been terminated and she no longer had standing. She stormed out again, and that was the last time anyone saw her at an HOA event. She still lives in Pine Hollow, but she keeps to herself now. No more whistle. No more stamp. No more performance. Linda and I became friends after that. She told me Krista had targeted at least a dozen residents over the past 2 years, always with the same pattern: vague accusations, bogus fines, fake emergencies, and public shaming. Most people had just paid the fines and moved on because fighting the HOA seemed impossible. Linda said she was glad someone finally stood up and won. I told her I could not have done it without her photos and her willingness to speak up. She said that was what neighbors were supposed to do. The stolen toolkit case was returned to its owner, a contractor who had been doing work in the neighborhood. He said he had assumed it was stolen by a random thief, and he had already filed an insurance claim. When he found out it was the HOA pool chair, he laughed and said he was not surprised. He said he had dealt with Krista before, and she had tried to charge him for parking in the guest lot during a job. He had refused, and she had threatened to ban him from the property. He said he should have known she was trouble. The police investigation took months, but eventually Krista was charged with petite theft and abuse of authority. She pleaded no contest and got probation, community service, and a fine. The HOA did not press for restitution because they wanted to avoid a lawsuit, but several residents filed small claims actions and won. Krista paid them off quietly and kept her head down. I stayed in Pine Hollow because I had already put down roots, and honestly, the neighborhood was not that bad once Krista was gone. The new pool chair was reasonable, the management office was responsive, and the board actually followed the bylaws. I even joined the landscaping committee, mostly to make sure nobody else pulled the kind of garbage Krista had. It has been quiet since then. No more bogus complaints, No more midnight deadlines. No more red stamps. Every now and then I see Krista in the parking lot or at the mailbox cluster. She does not make eye contact. She does not say hello. She just gets her mail and leaves. I do not bother her, and she does not bother me. That is how it should be. I hope you enjoyed this HOA drama.